The air in the Pine Barrens, New Jersey, was a heavy, suffocating blanket of damp earth and decaying pine needles. It was late October 1908, the kind of afternoon where the low, grey sky seemed to press down on the sparse settlements. Deputy Elias Thorne, 35, pulled the collar of his tweed coat tight around his neck. The old Model K Ford sputtered over the uneven dirt track, the sound a jarring insult to the oppressive silence of the woods. For Elias, the Barrens were not a place of natural beauty, but a sprawling, unforgiving repository of forgotten secrets. He was responding to a call that was more curiosity than crime. A land surveyor from Trenton, hired to map a new logging boundary, had stumbled upon an anomaly. A derelict farmhouse, preserved with unnatural stillness, yet abandoned for decades in one of the Barrens' most remote, undocumented corners. "Looks like it was just walked away from," the surveyor had reported, his voice tinged with unease over the telephone line. "Everything's inside, Deputy. Like they just vanished." Elias parked the Ford beside a cluster of skeletal scrub oaks. He stepped out, the wet soil sucking at his boots. The house, known only in local whispers as the Old Thorn Place, though unrelated to Elias, sat on a slight rise, shadowed by towering, gnarled pines. It was a simple, two-story structure, its clapboard siding bleached gray by 2 decades of sun and rain. But what was truly unsettling was the intact nature of the scene. The front door was slightly ajar, rattling faintly in the breeze. A faded curtain hung limply in an upstairs window. Elias drew his sidearm, more for reassurance against the local wildlife than any human threat, and approached. The porch sagged under his weight. He pushed the door fully open. Inside, the silence was absolute, a dead vacuum where the sounds of life should have lingered. Dust lay thick on every surface, undisturbed by even the faintest draft. A kerosene lamp stood on a small parlor table, the wick untouched. On a hook near the back door, a child's small blue wool coat hung, seemingly waiting for its owner. The calendar on the wall was the key. It was turned to August 1908, but years were etched by hand onto the page, counting backward to 1890. 18 years. The house had been frozen in time for 18 years, yet it felt as if the occupants had simply stepped out for a moment. Elias moved through the small kitchen. A cast-iron kettle rested on the cold stove. A few dirty, unwashed plates sat in a basin of stagnant, scummy water. He found no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, and no blood. This wasn't a crime scene of violence. It was a scene of sudden, inexplicable absence. He knew the legend immediately. Everyone in the small, close-knit and often judgmental communities that skirted the Barrens knew the story of the young mother, Sarah, barely 18 herself. Back in 1890, she had been the center of a swirling scandal following the sudden death of her husband and the questionable paternity of her second son. The community had effectively shunned her, their harsh judgment fueled by religious fervor and small-town spite. She locked herself and her sons away. That was the whisper. She was mad from the shame. Elias checked the pantry. Empty. He checked the upstairs bedrooms. The beds were neatly made, covered by thick, dust-laden quilts. He noted 2 small, crude carvings of wooden animals on a windowsill in the smaller room. A mother and her 2 boys had certainly lived here. His investigation led him back to the kitchen, where the floorboards were unusually rough and uneven near the corner chimney. He knelt, scraping away the dust. There it was, a heavy wooden trapdoor fitted flush into the floor leading to the cellar. It was not merely closed, it was secured by 3 heavy iron bolts, driven deep into the surrounding wood. And, chillingly, a massive, rusted, brass-plated padlock hung through a metal hasp on the exterior of the door. Someone had sealed the cellar, and they had done it from the outside. Elias ran a gloved hand over the cold, rough wood of the trapdoor. If the mother and her sons had disappeared, why was the door secured like this? Had the mother locked her children inside and then fled? Or had the community, in their self-righteous moral outrage, decided to seal the family in their shame? The silence of the house pressed in on him, heavier now, laced with the metallic tang of old rust and the faint, sweet smell of decay. The truth, Elias knew, was hidden beneath this heavy wooden seal. He felt a profound sense of foreboding, realizing this wasn't just a cold case, it was a human drama, left to rot in the solitude of the Barrens. The psychological terror had begun the moment the community turned its back 18 years ago. Now, he was tasked with finishing the story. He stood up, his mind already churning with the required legal maneuvers to secure a warrant and a set of cutting tools. The padlock was old, but resistant. Elias looked at the heavy, sealed trapdoor one last time, the padlock an ugly, stubborn monument to a long-held secret. The mystery was palpable. What was beneath? And who had been the last person to secure the lock? If you're already caught in the chilling atmosphere of the Pine Barrens, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss how this dark secret unfolds. The truth lies just beyond this lock. Elias drove slowly back toward Batstow, the nearest settlement with anything resembling law and order. The isolation of the Barrens was a deliberate choice for many of its residents, fostering a deep-seated distrust of outsiders and a fierce protectiveness of local secrets. He knew getting answers would be like pulling teeth from granite. The Batstow General Store was the town's unofficial parliament. Elias found a clutch of old men huddled around a potbelly stove, their faces etched with the hard lines of a life spent battling the harsh New Jersey landscape. They greeted him with the customary silence reserved for the law. Elias started simply, showing them a crude sketch of the farmhouse. The old Thorn place, founded today. Anyone remember who lived there 18 years back? The men exchanged knowing, heavy glances. The air in the store thickened with unspoken history. An old man named Jedediah, his eyes roomy and distant, finally cleared his throat. That'd be Sarah's place, Deputy. Sarah Thorne. And her 2 boys, I reckon, Elias prompted, keeping his tone neutral. Aye, little ones, Daniel, the elder, and Thomas. A sweet boy, Thomas, but a child of shame. Jedediah muttered, spitting a stream of tobacco juice toward the stove. The term child of shame cut through the air. Elias pressed on, sensing the undercurrent of moral judgment. They vanished in 1890. Did anyone see them leave? Was there an investigation? Another man, Silas, spoke up, his voice brittle with long-held resentment. They didn't leave, Deputy. She ran from the judgment of the Lord and the decency of this community. After what happened with her husband, and then the boy. He trailed off, shaking his head. Elias had to pry the details out slowly, like breaking shards of ice. Sarah's husband, John Thorne, had been a decent man, but rough. He died in a supposed hunting accident, a fall from a ridge with his rifle going off. It was quickly ruled accidental. But a year later, Thomas was born, clearly not John's child. The community's condemnation was swift and absolute. They called her a harlot and a murderer, didn't they? Elias asked quietly. She deserved worse, Silas scoffed. Preacher said she brought the devil's misfortune to the Barrens. Her own kin wouldn't speak to her. She was alone. That's why she sealed herself away. To hide the shame. Elias described the scene. The house intact, the hanging coat, the dishes, and the sealed cellar door, bolted and padlocked from the outside. The revelation struck the men dumb. Jedediah frowned, his brow furrowed with confusion, then suspicion. Sealed from the outside? That ain't right, Deputy. If she locked herself in, she'd secure it from the inside, wouldn't she? Someone else did that. Who would do that, Jedediah? The locals all thought she ran. Maybe. Or maybe someone wanted them gone for good. To bury the whole mess, Jedediah speculated, his eyes darting nervously toward the window. The Barrens don't like stains, Deputy, and that family was a stain. Elias realized the true horror lay not in a simple flight, but in the community's brutal ostracism, a psychological pressure cooker that could drive a young woman to desperate acts. The padlock suggested an accomplice, or perhaps a captor, acting under the guise of the family's disappearance. His immediate obstacle was the padlock. To cut it without authorization would violate protocol. He needed a warrant to force entry and, crucially, to trace the key. Who in town would have known Sarah well? Someone she might have trusted even after the scandal? Elias asked. Jedediah eventually recalled a distant cousin of Sarah's, an elderly woman named Martha Riggs, who lived several miles north. Martha was kin, but not close. She took some of Sarah's things after the disappearance, some family heirlooms. Maybe a key, too. I can't rightly say. The mention of an heirloom key sent a chill down Elias's spine. A key to a secret kept for 18 years. Elias secured the premises and spent the rest of the evening petitioning the county judge for an emergency warrant to enter the sealed cellar, citing the possibility of a concealed tragedy. He also made a crucial call to Dr. Agnes Miller in Camden. Dr. Miller, a sharp, forward-thinking physician with an interest in early forensics, was Elias's only true ally in these cold, rural cases. Agnes, it's Elias. I need you to travel to Batstow immediately. I've found a house, a sealed cellar. It smells like a psychological burial ground, and I need a professional to assess what's down there. I suspect a human drama, not a crime of passion, but something far colder. I need you here tomorrow morning. As the clock ticked past midnight, Elias sat alone in the Batstow Sheriff's outpost, the signed warrant heavy in his hand. The Barrens whined, howled outside, sounding like a collective sigh of the dead. He felt the weight of 18 years pressing down on him. The mother, the shame, the missing boys, and the lock placed by an unseen hand. The story was starting to feel less like a case and more like a haunting of conscience and consequence, contained entirely within the limits of human cruelty. The following morning, the pervasive gray had deepened into a relentless drizzle. Elias drove north to the sparsely populated area where Martha Riggs lived. Her cabin was small, neat, and stood in stark contrast to the decay of Sarah's house. Martha Riggs was a woman in her late 60s, slight and guarded, her eyes holding the weariness of a lifetime of discretion. She offered Elias a cup of bitter black coffee, her movements slow and deliberate. Elias laid the matter out simply, displaying the official warrant. Mrs. Riggs, I've located Sarah Thorne's cellar. It's secured with a large padlock. The local men suggested you might hold a family heirloom that could be the key. Martha's composure faltered only slightly. She sat down heavily, clutching her apron. The shame. It should have been left alone, Deputy. Those stories, they haunt the woods. Did Sarah ever talk to you about the cellar? Or the padlock? Martha sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across the floor. Sarah was fearful. Always. After John died, and with the town turning on her, she became closed off. She saw threats everywhere. She believed the townspeople were waiting for a reason to take her boys away. She told me once the cellar was her fortress. Said she'd rather lock them all away than let the world contaminate them. But the lock was placed from the outside, Mrs. Riggs. Martha looked genuinely distressed. Then someone betrayed her. Or they did what she feared. She gave me the key right before they vanished. Said to keep it safe, just in case. Said if she ever needed help, I'd be the only one who could get them out. And you never used it? How could I? The town said she ran. The law said she ran. If I'd shown that key, I'd have been guilty by association. People in the Barrens are quick to judge, Deputy. I kept it, prayed over it, and kept silent. She rose slowly and went to an old oak chest. From a small velvet pouch, she produced a single key. It was heavy, made of ornate brass, and clearly matched the age and style of the massive lock Elias had seen. As she handed it to him, her fingers trembled. "Deputy, you must promise me. Leave the sleeping things alone. Let the earth keep its secrets." "I can't promise that, Mrs. Riggs. If children were sealed in a cellar for 18 years, the truth must be known. The truth is that people are cruel, Elias. That's the only truth that matters." Elias returned to the Thorn place. Waiting for him was Dr. Agnes Miller, a woman with a no-nonsense manner and sharp, intelligent eyes. She carried a case filled with tools that were far more advanced than anything the local law enforcement possessed. She had already assessed the house's exterior. "The preservation is remarkable, Deputy. It suggests no one has interfered with the interior since the day they left. The atmospheric pressure inside must have helped. It's a natural time capsule," Agnes observed, pulling on a pair of rubber gloves. Elias showed her the cellar trap door and the enormous padlock. "The key works, Agnes. The door has been sealed for 18 years, possibly longer. A mother and her 2 young sons are likely behind it. And the lock was set by an outside party. That shifts the narrative from a mother's flight to a sinister act of confinement," Agnes noted, her voice low. "It suggests the mother, Sarah, was either trapped or was working with someone who ultimately betrayed her." Elias inserted the brass key into the cold, rusted lock. The key turned with a groaning, protesting sound, the mechanism finally yielding. The padlock fell with a heavy, final clunk onto the floorboards. Elias and Agnes worked together to slide the bolts back, the dry wood screaming under the friction. They took a deep breath, steeling themselves. The air that rushed up from the gap was thick, cloying, and intensely cold. It was the scent of forgotten life, of damp earth, and something indefinable that settled deep in the chest, a profound sense of despair. Elias lifted the heavy trapdoor. Complete darkness met them. He lit his kerosene lamp and carefully descended the wooden steps, Agnes close behind him. The mystery was about to yield its terrible secret. The descent was slow and cautious. The steps were rickety, and the air immediately turned heavy, thick with the aroma of cold, wet stone and stale air. Elias held the kerosene lamp aloft, the dim, flickering light pushing back the oppressive darkness. The cellar was small, maybe 15 feet square, with low, damp stone walls. It was not a typical root cellar used for seasonal storage. It was clearly a space adapted for long-term, desperate habitation. The initial shock was the sheer absence of human remains. There were no skeletons, no scattered bones, no immediate evidence of the tragedy Elias had anticipated. The terror was purely psychological, stemming from the evidence of life lived in confinement. "My God, Elias," Agnes whispered, her breath fogging in the cold air. They were down here. In one corner, a pallet had been constructed from layers of burlap sacks and rough blankets, clearly designated for sleeping. Beside it, a small overturned wooden crate served as a table. On the crate, 2 small chipped tin cups and 3 bent spoons lay covered in a thick layer of dust. The arrangement screamed of a life reduced to the absolute minimum. "Look at this," Elias said, pointing the light at the far wall. The stone was covered in a rough, uneven plaster, and etched into the plaster were crude drawings. Stick figures, representing a mother and 2 small children, holding hands. Below them a few scribbled lines that looked like a house, but drawn without windows, a solid, enclosed box. Agnes knelt, examining the floor. "The floor is packed earth, Deputy. And note the ventilation. There's a small, bricked-up grate near the ceiling. Minimal, but enough for 3 people to survive for a period." The provisions were what struck Elias next. Along the dampest wall, neatly stacked, were dozens of mason jars filled with preserved fruits and vegetables, peaches, beans, and corn, the contents dark and murky now. Beside them, cans of sardines and salted meat. The supplies suggested a planned, deliberate sequestration, not a sudden, panicked hiding. Sarah had prepared her fortress. She didn't run, Agnes. She chose this. She chose to protect them from the outside, from the shame. Elias observed, the cold weight of the mother's paranoia settling over him. But for how long? Agnes moved to a corner and pointed to a rusty, covered chamber pot. The hygiene was minimal but controlled. They lived here, Elias. Maybe not for 18 years, but certainly for a significant time. She was keeping them safe, or what she perceived as safe, from the judgment. Elias noticed an unnatural smoothness in a section of the earth floor near the chimney foundation. He used a small trowel from Agnes's kit to scrape away the top layer of dust. Beneath, a small, worn piece of leather was revealed. He pulled it out, a small, leather-bound journal, protected from the damp by a sheet of thin, oilskin cloth. The mother's voice, Elias murmured, his heart pounding with professional anticipation and personal dread. He opened the journal carefully. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was distinct, starting off neat and legible, documenting the initial days of their confinement. August 1890. The entry began. Day 1. The air is cold but clean. We are safe now. Daniel and Thomas are sleeping. They don't understand the venom in the voices outside. I told them this is a game, our secret camp. We will stay here until the world remembers decency. The shame they lay upon us cannot touch us in this earth. The pantry is stocked. The lock is set. We are together. We are protected. The entries progressed rapidly, detailing their meager meals, the children's boredom, and Sarah's attempts to teach them by candlelight. But soon, the tone began to change. Day 45. The light is failing. My hands ache from sewing in the dark. Daniel asked if the sun forgot about us. I told him the sun shines for those who deserve it. We deserve a quiet sun. The food is lasting, but my strength is not. I hear things above us at night. Footsteps, heavy ones. I must be silent. They are hunting us. LA 98. The air is thin. The drawings keep the boys busy. Thomas drew a man with no face outside the box. I told him to draw a bird. He cried. The footsteps come every night now. Closer, louder. I have to secure the door better. The world wants us to pay for the shame. I will not let them take my boys. The lock is our only friend. The terror was escalating, shifting from external societal pressure to acute, internal psychological paranoia. She wasn't hiding from judgment. She was hiding from a perceived physical threat. The footsteps, the hunting. Was it a real person? Or the manifestation of Sarah's profound mental distress exacerbated by the isolation? Elias looked up from the journal, his eyes meeting Agnes's. She was breaking, Agnes. The isolation, the shame, it drove her to delusion. But the lock, if she secured it, how did she get out? Or if someone else secured it, who was hunting them? The silence of the cellar offered no answer, only the chilling evidence of a mother's desperate claustrophobic love. The key was turned, but the lock of the mystery was far from open. Elias and Agnes worked quickly to document the cellar, their movements silent and respectful, surrounded by the remnants of the lost family. Elias returned to Sarah's journal, knowing the key to the family's disappearance lay within the increasingly erratic scroll. He carried the journal upstairs to the kitchen, where the weak light made the words easier to decipher. The entries continued to chart Sarah's mental decline and the growing terror of the man in the woods. Day 160. The food is getting thin. I went out tonight, just for an hour. Took the ladder out the trapdoor, slid the bolts, and locked it behind me. It felt like I was crawling out of a grave. The moon was a knife. I heard a branch snap, close. I grabbed what I could from the pantry upstairs, cans, jars. They're watching, I know it. They know I have the boys. I must not let them see me leave the house. I secured the cellar from the outside quickly. They must think the house is empty. The boys were crying when I returned. Daniel says Thomas has a cough. No light, no light, no light. This entry confirmed two crucial facts. First, Sarah was occasionally leaving the cellar, locking it behind her to maintain the illusion of an abandoned house and to protect the boys. And second, her paranoia was rooted in the persistent feeling of being watched, hunted by the man. Elias noted the date of this entry, February 1891. They had been in the cellar for at least 6 months. The entries took a darker turn, focusing on the external threat rather than the internal hardships. Day 205. The man came to the house last night. I heard him on the floorboards right above us. Heavy shoes, slow, deliberate. He stayed for hours. I held the boys tight. We couldn't make a sound. Daniel wet himself. I can't wash his clothes. The air is so thick. He must know we are here. Why doesn't he try to get in? He's playing a game. He wants us to suffer. He wants the shame to consume us. I heard him whisper a name, not mine. He whispered Thomas's name. This is about Thomas. The man wants Thomas. The revelation that the man might be linked specifically to Thomas, the child of shame, was a terrifying twist. It pulled the mystery away from generalized community judgment toward a specific personal threat, a realistic scenario of revenge or custody fight, framed by Sarah's profound delusion. Elias put the journal down, running a hand through his hair. The man in the woods. He's real, Agnes. Or at least, Sarah believed him to be real, and her actions were based on that belief. Who, 18 years ago, had a reason to want Thomas, the man who fathered him? Elias realized he had to dig into the cold 18-year-old files, the records of the scandal and the original death investigation. He drove back to Batstow, the journal safely tucked in his coat pocket. He found the archived files in a dusty cabinet at the outpost. The original investigator was a man named Jenkins, a deputy who had since retired and moved south to Lakewood. Elias looked through the witness statements regarding John Thorne's hunting accident. The findings were superficial. John was found at the base of a small ravine, his rifle discharged, cause of death listed as blunt force trauma, and a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The entire case was closed in less than a week. Elias felt a familiar, sickening lurch, the telltale sign of a hurried, perhaps compromised investigation. A separate, very brief file existed on the Thomas paternity dispute. It contained only rumors and hearsay. However, Elias found a single handwritten note appended to the file, dated just a month before the family vanished. Meeting with Mr. Jenkins regarding the Thomas Thorne situation. Concern expressed over potential custody action. Advised quiet solution. Elias stared at the name. Mr. Jenkins, the original investigator of the husband's death, the same man who would have been privy to all the rumors and, perhaps, the identity of Thomas's true father. The quiet solution? Could the man in the woods be Jenkins himself, trying to control a devastating secret that could ruin his career and life in the rigid 1908 society? The final, chilling entry in Sarah's journal seemed to confirm her deepest fear and provided a potential date for the end of their confinement. March 1891. Day 220. He's here. I heard him talking. He said he was going to help us. Said the Barrens were dangerous and he would move us to a better place, a secret one. He sounds kind, but his voice is not John's. It's the man's voice. I told Daniel and Thomas to hide in the small back chamber. They must be quiet. They must never come out. I hear him at the trap door now. He has the key. He's coming to finish the shame. I will fight. I will not let him touch my sons. The journal ended abruptly here. The horrifying suggestion was that Jenkins had used the key provided by Martha, perhaps under duress or by deception, to enter the cellar and help them. A help that Sarah desperately mistrusted. The mystery was now fully focused on Mr. Jenkins and what he did after opening that trap door. Elias secured the warrant to interview the retired Deputy Jenkins in Lakewood, a coastal town well outside the Barrens. The drive was long, giving Elias time to piece together the likely scenario. The theory: Jenkins, likely the father of Thomas, was protecting his reputation. When the scandal of Thomas's birth threatened to destroy his marriage and career, he may have suggested Sarah hide in the cellar, promising to bring her supplies and ensure their safety. This would have kept his secret quiet and Sarah neutralized. Sarah, already fragile and terrified of public scorn, may have agreed to the initial plan of confinement. However, her paranoia, perhaps fueled by Jenkins's sporadic and secretive visits, the footsteps, grew until she became convinced Jenkins was the man in the woods, hunting her son. Elias met Jenkins at his neat seaside bungalow. Jenkins was now a frail, polite man, in his late 50s, enjoying a quiet retirement. He greeted Elias with the expected, slightly condescending air of a former senior officer. "Thorne? The Thorne place, you say? That was a messy one." "Sad business," Jenkins said, settling back into his armchair. "Mother ran off with the boys. Shame drove her mad. We closed the case, ruled it a simple disappearance." Elias produced a worn photograph of Sarah Thorne, taken shortly before she vanished. "Mr. Jenkins, you handled the initial investigation into the death of her husband, John, and you were involved in the subsequent inquiries into Thomas's paternity." Jenkins flinched slightly, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. "Small town, Deputy. You're involved in everything, whether you like it or not. The paternity issue was just talk, nasty gossip. And the journal. It says she heard footsteps. It talks about the man in the woods whispering Thomas's name. It talks about a specific person who had the key, who came to help her and the boys leave the cellar in March 1891. Elias watched him closely. She described the man's voice. Jenkins visibly paled, reaching for a glass of water. The journal? How? That old cellar was sealed. Padlocked from the outside, Mr. Jenkins, by someone who had access to the heirloom key. Someone who knew Sarah. Someone who was trying to control the situation. Someone whose life would have been ruined if the secret of Thomas's paternity came out. Elias stated, his voice even and accusatory. Jenkins attempted to regain control, his tone shifting to indignation. "I resent the implication, Deputy. Sarah was unstable. Her husband's death was ruled an accident. Her running was ruled a flight. You're chasing ghosts in the Barrens. Ghosts leave no evidence, Mr. Jenkins. But human actions do." Elias leaned forward. "Did you convince her to hide? Did you bring her supplies? Were you, the man in the woods, checking on the secret you created?" Jenkins's composure shattered. He slammed his glass down. Yes, I was the one. The shame. It would have ruined me. I was married, a deputy. I told her to hide for a few months until the gossip died down. I brought her supplies, secretly under the cover of night. I told her I'd get them out when it was safe." He buried his face in his hands, his body shaking. "But she was gone, Thorne. When I went back in March, I opened the door and the cellar was empty. She'd fled, just like we said. I bolted it shut to stop scavengers and to keep the truth of the scandal sealed forever. I was afraid someone would discover the provisions. I locked it from the outside myself." Elias remained silent, allowing the confession to hang in the air. "The journal says she was still in the cellar when you arrived. It says she told the boys to hide in the back chamber. It says she prepared to fight you." Jenkins looked up, his eyes wide with a fear that transcended his age. "A back chamber? I never knew about a back chamber. She wasn't there, Thorne, I swear. Just the empty cellar." "We're going back to the cellar, Mr. Jenkins. You and me. The house of shame is ready to tell its final secret." The truth was now horrifyingly clearer. Jenkins had convinced Sarah to confine herself, feeding her paranoia with his secretive visits. He had then returned to rescue them, but found the cellar seemingly empty and sealed the door, assuming she had run off deeper into the woods, forever burying the problem he had created. but Sarah's final defiant entry suggested a last, desperate act of hiding. Elias returned to the Thorn place with Dr. Agnes Miller the next day, bringing a team from the sheriff's department to assist. The mood was grim, heavy with the knowledge of Jenkins's betrayal. The cellar was no longer just a site of a disappearance, it was a scene of a prolonged, silent torment. Jenkins's confession corroborates Sarah's paranoia, Agnes noted, examining the cellar floor once more. He was the external threat, even if his intentions were to secure his own reputation, not to harm them. He created the very monster she was hiding from. Elias pointed to the section of the floor near the back wall, behind where the stacks of preserved food jars had been. She wrote that she told the boys to hide in a small back chamber. Jenkins said he never saw it. It has to be here. The team began carefully clearing the area. The stone walls, though solid, felt strangely hollow in one particular spot, near the foundation of the old house's chimney. The mortar was a different consistency, a slight, almost imperceptible variation in color. It was concealed deliberately, Agnes confirmed, tapping the wall with a small geological hammer. The sound was flat and shallow. A dry stone wall, designed to look like the main foundation but actually concealing a small sub-chamber. A perfect place for a paranoid mother to hide her children during an external threat. Using picks and specialized chisels, the team began to dismantle the disguised section. The work was slow, laborious, and fraught with a growing sense of dread. The air in the cellar grew colder, the oppressive silence seeming to resist their intrusion. The psychological suspense of the last 6 chapters, the fear of the unseen, the torment of the known, was now reaching its inevitable physical climax. After an hour of careful work, a dark, narrow opening was revealed, barely large enough for a person to crawl through. Elias shone his lamp into the space. It was a small, crudely dug cavity, not more than 6 feet by 4, walled off with rough-hewn timber beams. The subchamber was empty. A wave of profound disappointment and confusion washed over Elias. She was right here. She told them to hide, and Jenkins said he sealed the door. Where did they go? Agnes crawled into the opening, examining the dirt floor. She was meticulous, sifting the soil with her gloved fingers. "The space is empty, Elias, but it's not clean," she called out, her voice muffled. "There's a deep depression here, a long, narrow trough dug into the earth. It looks like a very old, shallow grave or a disturbance." She held up a small, weathered artifact, a toy train carved from wood and painted a faded red. It was a child's toy, perhaps belonging to Daniel or Thomas. Elias crouched near the opening, his light illuminating the doctor's findings. The sight of the abandoned toy, the final, pathetic piece of a child's life, was more chilling than any scream. Agnes then let out a sharp gasp. "Elias, look here, near the timber frame." She reached down and retrieved something small, metallic and distinctly modern for the 1890s. It was a brass shell casing, spent, and showing only minimal corrosion from the damp earth. Elias carefully took the casing. He was intimately familiar with firearms. This was not an old casing, it was an anomaly. "This is a .32 caliber casing, Agnes. It's relatively fresh, certainly not 18 years old. Someone was in this sub-chamber well after Sarah and the boys vanished, and they fired a gun," Elias stated, his mind racing. This single piece of evidence destroyed Jenkins's confession that he found the cellar empty and simply locked it. The casing meant either 1. Sarah and the boys survived the initial meeting with Jenkins, fled into the sub-chamber, and someone else discovered them and fired the shot, or 2. Jenkins returned to the house, found the sub-chamber, and was responsible for whatever happened here. The mystery had doubled back, casting a dark shadow of potential violence over the psychological horror. Jenkins lied about the subchamber, but why? Elias looked from the small hidden space to the heavy secured trapdoor above them. The true nature of the family's ending was not flight, nor simple abandonment. It was a violent personal tragedy, concealed not just by shame, but by a lie. The walls of the cellar are closing in, and the mystery is far from solved. Click like on this video and share your theories in the comments. And if you haven't yet, join our community by subscribing. We're about to uncover the darkest truth hidden in the Pine Barrens. Elias and Agnes spent the rest of the day meticulously documenting the subchamber, the brass casing secured as critical evidence. The discovery changed everything, proving Jenkins had lied and introducing a definite element of violence into the case. Elias drove back to Lakewood, the weight of the new evidence pressing on him. He decided not to arrest Jenkins immediately. He needed the full truth, not a panicked denial. He needed to break the man down completely. He found Jenkins sitting on his porch, rocking gently. He looked frail, but a flicker of nervous energy betrayed his facade of calmness. "Back so soon, Deputy?" Jenkins asked, his voice hollow. Elias didn't waste time. He pulled out the brass casing and placed it on the small table between them. "Mr. Jenkins, you told me you found the cellar empty in March 1891 and simply sealed it. You told me you never knew about the subchamber." Jenkins stared at the casing, his face turning the color of old ash. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. "We found the subchamber, Mr. Jenkins, and we found this, a .32 caliber casing, not from 1891. We also found a toy train belonging to one of the boys. Someone was in that hidden room, and they fired a weapon." The composure Jenkins had maintained for nearly 2 decades finally cracked. He slumped back, his eyes defeated. The shame of it all. "Tell me the truth, Mr. Jenkins. When did you find the subchamber and what did you do?" Jenkins confessed in a low, trembling voice, his words punctuated by ragged, shuddering breaths. I lied to you, Deputy, and I lied to myself. The house, it haunted me for years. I couldn't sleep thinking of them down there. I had to know they were gone. I had to confirm they had run away just to save my soul." He paused, gathering strength. "I went back, not in 1891. I went back 5 years ago, in 1903. The house was exactly as I had left it. I went down into the cellar, and this time my lamp caught something, a difference in the stone. I found the subchamber." "And what did you find, Mr. Jenkins?" "Nothing at first. Empty. Then I saw the fresh-turned earth, the deep rut. I dug, Deputy, I had to know, and then I found them." Elias leaned in, bracing himself for the horror. "You found Sarah and the boys?" "No, not exactly. I found the remains of a single body. A man." Jenkins shuddered violently. It was the original surveyor, the one who owned the land before the logging company bought it. He'd disappeared in the Barrens in 1901, gone without a trace. Elias felt a cold rush of disbelief. The mystery was peeling back like an onion, each layer revealing a new, unexpected horror. The surveyor? What does he have to do with Sarah and the boys? "I don't know, Thorne. He was buried there, deep enough that it looked like a hasty job. I panicked. I knew I couldn't report it. It would have led you to the cellar, to my secret to Thomas. So, I filled the grave back in. I sealed the subchamber again, making sure to hide the wall better this time. I took my pistol and fired one shot into the dirt to make it look like a struggle, to muddy the waters if anyone ever found it. The chamber was empty of Sarah and the boys, just the dead surveyor." Jenkins' confession, while horrifying, was grounded in a real, if self-serving, logic. He had discovered a new crime scene within his old secret and covered it up to protect himself. This explained the recent casing and the disturbed earth. "Where are Sarah and the boys, Mr. Jenkins?" Jenkins looked utterly defeated. "I don't know, I swear on my life. I think she must have been so afraid of me, the man, that when she heard me at the trapdoor in 91, she led them out another way. A back way, deep into the Barrens. They never looked in the surrounding woods. She probably died out there trying to escape the world that judged her." Elias was left with the sickening realization that Sarah's journal ended with her preparing to fight. But the cellar was ultimately empty of her and her sons. And the subchamber held the body of a man murdered years after they vanished. The psychological drama had suddenly been crossed with a later, darker reality. The cellar of shame had become a tomb, and Jenkins, the co-creator of the shame, had become its reluctant caretaker. But who killed the surveyor in 1901 and hid him in Sarah's secret sanctuary? And what happened to Sarah and the boys? The focus now shifted from the long-dead scandal to the recently murdered surveyor and the search for the killer who used the cellar as a tomb. Elias realized the real man in the woods wasn't Jenkins's reputation, but a more tangible, more dangerous figure who knew the Barrens and, crucially, knew about the hidden subchamber. Elias had Jenkins arrested for obstruction of justice and the concealment of a body. Then he returned to the Barrens with Agnes, reviewing the records of the murdered surveyor, a man named Henry Graves. Graves was a former logging foreman, known for his harsh temperament and aggressive business practices. He disappeared after a land dispute with a local group of squatters who lived deep in the isolation of the Barrens, rarely coming to town. The local police had dismissed Graves's disappearance as another man swallowed by the vast, unforgiving woods. Whoever killed Graves knew the house was abandoned, Agnes pointed out, standing over the excavated subchamber. They also knew about this hidden room. Only Sarah and perhaps the person she trusted most would have known of its existence. Sarah told no one, Agnes. She only wrote about it in her final entry, Elias mused. But someone else was down here in 1891, Jenkins. And if Sarah and the boys weren't buried, and didn't simply run deeper into the Barrens to die, where could they have gone? Agnes asked. Elias thought back to the journal. Sarah's growing paranoia, her belief that the man was getting closer. Her fear was so acute she was willing to seal herself and her children in the earth. A deep psychological fear based on an actual physical threat. Elias suddenly snapped his fingers. The shame. The scandal wasn't just about Thomas's paternity, Agnes. It was about John Thorne's death. He reread the original file on John Thorne's hunting accident. The official cause was a fall, followed by a self-inflicted gunshot. A single witness, a local trapper, had found the body and reported the incident. The trapper's name was Robert Vance. Elias drove to the Batstow Outpost Library and pulled up a detailed map of the area, cross-referencing Vance's property lines with the Thorne place. Vance lived only 2 miles from Sarah's house. He was one of the few people who could have been Sarah's eyes in the community, or her supplier, or her husband's killer. Elias tracked down Robert Vance. Vance was still living in the Barrens, an older man now, gaunt and taciturn, perfectly blending into the harsh landscape. Elias found him chopping wood behind his cabin. "Mr. Vance, I'm reopening the case on Sarah Thorne and the disappearance of her 2 sons, Daniel and Thomas. I also have questions about the death of John Thorne in 1890. Vance stopped chopping. His eyes narrowed, the axe handle still in his hands. "That's old news, Deputy. Shameful news. The woman ran. Leave it be. John Thorne's death was ruled an accident based on your testimony, Mr. Vance. You said he fell and his rifle discharged." "That's the truth," Vance growled. "No, the truth is that John Thorne knew about Thomas's true father, Mr. Vance, and you were there. You weren't a witness. You were the one who put the bullet in him," Elias challenged, watching the man's hands tighten on the axe. Vance had been Sarah's only confidant, her true ally after she was ostracized, and her protector against the growing wrath of her husband, John. Sarah had confided in Vance about John's escalating rage over Thomas's paternity. Vance, in a desperate attempt to protect Sarah, had confronted John on the hunting trip. A struggle ensued, and Vance killed John, making it look like an accident. "Sarah loved you, didn't she, Vance? You were the man in the woods. Not Jenkins, not a phantom. You were the only one she truly trusted, the one who could bring her supplies and visit secretly." Vance finally dropped the axe, his shoulders slumping. She needed protection, Deputy. John would have killed her. He was a brute. And when you killed John, you realized you had created a different kind of shame, didn't you? A murder that couldn't be revealed. So you convinced Sarah that the community was hunting her, that she needed to hide in the cellar, her fortress. A perfect hiding spot for your lover and her children. Vance looked up, tears streaming down his face. Yes, I promised I'd get them out. I was the one who padlocked the door to keep the secret and keep them safe. This was the final, devastating truth of the psychological horror. The mother locked her children away, not because of madness, but because of a credible, physical threat. A man who had just committed murder for her sake and needed her hidden to protect his secret. And when you came back in 1891 to free them, you found the cellar empty, just as Jenkins did. Why? Vance shook his head, looking utterly lost. I didn't. I never went back. I was too afraid, too consumed by my own secret. I was going to, one day. But I kept supplying the house, leaving jars on the porch. Then one day the house was silent. I just assumed they had died of sickness or starved or fled deeper into the woods to escape my supplies and my sin. Elias realized that the initial horror, the confinement, was a tragic collaboration between a killer, Vance, and a traumatized victim, Sarah. But the final, most terrible truth was still missing. What happened after Sarah's final journal entry, when she told her sons to hide and prepared to fight Jenkins? The final confrontation with Vance had unraveled the layers of the 18-year-old's psychological crime. A murder, John Thorne's, masked as an accident, leading to an extreme voluntary confinement, Sarah and her sons, designed to protect a secret and save a life. The true horror was the catastrophic result of human action and its cover-up. But the fate of Sarah and the boys remained an agonizing open question. Elias had Vance arrested. Back in the Batstow outpost, Elias and Agnes stared at the map of the Thorne place. Vance was the killer of John Thorne and the person who padlocked the cellar. Jenkins was the father of Thomas and the man who concealed the later murder of the surveyor Graves. The layers of human cruelty were stacked one on top of the other. Vance didn't kill the surveyor Graves in 1901, Elias stated. He had no motive against Graves, only against John Thorne, and Vance was too consumed by guilt over the cellar to return and kill a man he didn't know. And Jenkins killed Graves to conceal his secret? Agnes countered. No, the single brass casing was too recent for Jenkins' cover-up 5 years ago. It's a .32 caliber casing, the same caliber Jenkins had. But he didn't confess to murder, only to concealment. He was genuinely shocked. Elias looked again at the journal, at the names, Sarah, Daniel, and Thomas, the mother who locked herself and her boys away. The boys, Agnes, Daniel, and Thomas. 18 years have passed since the confinement began. If they survived the starvation and illness, they would be men now. Daniel, born in 1888, would be 20. Thomas, the child of shame, born in 1890, would be 18. Elias felt a sudden, chilling certainty. The person who killed Graves, the surveyor, was a man who knew the Barrens intimately, who knew the house was abandoned, and who knew about the subchamber, a man who was raised in that darkness. Agnes's eyes widened, the realization dawning in hers as well. Thomas, Elias, the child of shame, the boy of 1890. The confrontation with Jenkins in 1891, detailed in Sarah's final journal entry, had been the turning point. Sarah had fled, as Jenkins assumed, but not deeper into the Barrens to die. When Sarah heard Jenkins coming to the trapdoor to free them, the voice of the man she had grown to fear, she led her sons out of the subchamber through a second, unknown, secret tunnel they had excavated together. A tunnel they had been working on for months, a last-ditch escape only mentioned in a heavily coded drawing in the cellar, a drawing of an arrow pointing down from the foundation. Sarah died soon after the escape from the combined effects of malnutrition and the Barrens' winter. But she had succeeded in delivering her sons to the deepest, most isolated squatter community in the Pine Barrens, a community that distrusted all outsiders. The boys, Daniel, 20, and Thomas, 18, were raised in total anonymity, taught to fear the outside world and the people who chased their mother into the earth. The surveyor, Henry Graves, was known for his aggressive attempts to secure land in the Barrens, even those belonging to the isolated squatter camps. Graves, in 1901, had tracked down and threatened the community. Thomas, the boy raised in darkness and shame, now a young man who had only known fear, murdered Graves to protect the only family he had left. He buried the body in the one place he knew would never be found, the sealed, forgotten cellar of his childhood, the house of shame. He used his father's, Jenkins's, old gun and his own ingrained survival instincts to conceal the crime. Elias found the surviving community deep in the woods. He did not find a monster, but a traumatized young man, Thomas, who confessed to the murder of the surveyor Graves, a man who threatened his safety. Elias realized the original shame of the Barrens was not the scandal of an illegitimate child, but the cruelty of the community that drove a mother to madness and forced her son into a life of shadow and violence. Thomas and Daniel were apprehended. Jenkins was prosecuted for obstruction. Vance was prosecuted for manslaughter. The House of Shame remained a testament to the tragic consequences of judgment and abandonment. The psychological terror of the story was fully realized. The deepest horror does not come from phantoms, but from the darkness that human beings inflict upon one another, and the devastating cycle of secrets and violence it breeds. The only mystery remaining was the silence of the woods, now heavier, knowing that all the terrible stories were, in the end, true.